What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing. The Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series will continue its conversation with you regarding the complete history of boxing. On November 2nd of 1907, the colored world heavyweight champion Jack Johnson knocks out fireman Jim Flynn in 11 rounds. The referee was Billy Rochian. Here's what happened in that contest. The referee warned fireman Jim Flynn 2 separate occasions. And remember, this was racism at its highest point during that time. So the referee, his hands were tied to the point where he couldn't disqualify fireman Jim Flynn because it would cause an outrage. So he looked at the referee's assistant, which happened to be the sheriff in town, and he shrugged his shoulders. I mean, what do you want me to do? I'm in a bind here. So the sheriff warned fireman Jim Flynn once. Jim Flynn was low-blowing Jack Johnson. Then it got to a point where he elevated the foul tactics and he would headbutt Jack Johnson to the point where the sheriff would step in and say, "To hell with this. Enough is enough." And he would disqualify fireman Jim Flynn. Now here's the thing with Jim Flynn. He was in the ring with Sam Langford 4 separate occasions. Sam Langford would knock out Jim Flynn for 7 minutes straight. Woke up, didn't know where he was. And Jim Flynn would knock out Jack Dempsey in the first round. There's stories about that fight based on who you talk to. They would say that Jack Dempsey's brother would throw in the towel simultaneously. They would say that Jack Dempsey took a dive. Everything but give full credit to the fact that Jack Dempsey just took an L laying down. And it happens in boxing. But it is what it is. But back to fireman Jim Flynn. I have a scrapbook of fireman Jim Flynn alone. It's a personal scrapbook from his family. And I'll probably show you that while I'm doing this series. I'm the only one that has this scrapbook. It's amazing some of the things that are in there. But fireman Jim Flynn really had no business in that ring with Jack Johnson. Now, we talked about Jim Flynn defeating Jack Johnson once before. But Jim Flynn really didn't have any business in the ring with Jack Johnson. And the contest was stopped. It was scheduled for 45 rounds. And all kinds of N-words were being yelled from Jim Flynn alone. Not including all the outside spectators. They didn't want Jack Johnson as heavyweight champion of the world. They didn't care who defeated him, as long as it was a white fighter. And it got to a point where in 1911, they would create a white championship tournament. And they had a title called the White Championship title. That ended in 1915 when Jack Johnson would be laid out in 26 rounds in Cuba, Havana by Jess Willard. Tuesday, November 12th, 1907, the Boston Bone Crusher Sam Langford would defeat young Peter Jackson in defense of his colored middleweight championship title. He walked in the ring weighing 158 pounds. Now the referee was Charles Eaton, and he announced Langford as the winner. The contest took place in Los Angeles, California. Now, prior to this bout, Jackson and Langford would mix it up 5 separate occasions. But young Peter Jackson would be the fighter that Sam Langford would win the colored middleweight championship title from. And it's amazing because 1936, Coco Kid, Herbert Lewis Hardwick, would win the colored welterweight championship title from a young Peter Jackson from the Pacific Coast, 2 different men. But I find that to be ironic. We'll learn about that as we get to that decade. But young Peter Jackson would be in the ring with Sam Langford 5 times. Joe Jeanette Black Bill, Professor Mike Donovan, who was a former middleweight champion, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who was a former light heavyweight. In fact, he wasn't even light heavyweight champion at that point. A Philadelphia Jack O'Brien would defeat Bob Fitzsimmons. You had Dixie Kidd, who was the former welterweight champion, 1904. Larry Temple, who was the original Bolo Punch creator. These are the fighters that young Peter Jackson would be in the ring with. So he was a formidable fighter. November 23rd, 1907. Frank Mattel knocks out Honey Boy Medley in 15 rounds, Dayton, Ohio. He would win the World Welterweight Champion of the world. December 2nd of 1907. World Heavyweight Champion Tommy Burns knocks out Gunnar Moyer in 10 rounds. It was in defense of his Heavyweight Championship title. December 12th, 1907. The World Middleweight Champion Stanley Ketchel has his third and final fight with Joe Thomas. It would be in defense of his Middleweight Championship title. They went 20 rounds. During those days, that was about what you went in a championship contest. 45 rounds, then 25 rounds. They changed it to 20 rounds, then 15 rounds. But you saw a fight. January 1st, 1908. One of the greatest bantamweights in boxing history. Abe Patel. He would defend his featherweight championship title in 25 rounds in a draw with Owen Moran. Now these two men would mix it up in California. Owen Moran, I'm going to show you a picture of him as the series goes on. He was as underrated as one fighter can be. Digger Stanley, all of those fighters from overseas were phenomenal fighters. January 23rd of 1908, the welterweight contender Harry Hairpin Lewis knocks out champion Frank Mattel in 3 rounds in New Haven, Connecticut, and that was the talk of the town. You talk about an unexpected moment. That one was. January 31st, 1908, featherweight champion Abe Patel knocks out Frankie Neal in 13 rounds in San Francisco, California. He would remain the championship featherweight title holder in that division. Now you hear Frankie Neal's name come up quite often. He was given several shots for the title. He was planted. And I'm careful how I say these things. But he had backers, if you will. Not that he asked for it, but he was part of the camps. February 10th, 1908. Heavyweight champion Tommy Burns takes on Jack Palmer. And he would defeat him in 4 rounds in London, England, and remains the heavyweight champion of the world. February 21st, Packer McFarlane defeats lightweight champion Freddie Welch in 10 rounds in Milwaukee. Now, Freddie Welch would lose his title in 1917 to my second greatest lightweight champion in boxing history, Benny Leonard, the Ghetto Wizard. We'll talk about that as the series continues. February 22nd, middleweight champion Stanley Ketchel knocks out Mike Twin Sullivan in 1 round in California. February 28th, featherweight champion Abe Patel knocks out Eddie Kelly in 7 rounds in San Francisco, California. He would defend his featherweight championship title. Now, March 17th of that year, heavyweight champion Tommy Burns knocks out Jim Roche. 1 minute and 28 seconds of the first round in Dublin, Ireland, and he would remain the world heavyweight champion. Meanwhile, the current heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson, has been following Burns, showing him that he wants to fight, flexing his muscles, showing the gold teeth, showing up at bars, ringside, boat docks, and demanding a title shot. Puts me in mind of Let's Go champ Shannon Briggs as he followed Vladimir Klitschko. Where you eat, I eat. Where you train, I train. Where your press conference is held, mine is held at the exact same time. Where you swim, I swim. And this is what happened with Jack Johnson and Tommy Burns. As quiet as it's kept, Sam Langford would do the same thing. Marvelous Marvin Hagler. I was at several of his fights. In 1978, in Philadelphia Spectrum, he had faced Bad Benny Briscoe. And after that bout, he called out Ronnie Harris, who was the 1968 Olympic gold medalist. And it was a shock to everyone there. He called out a lot of men after his fights, calling them sissies and so on and so forth. March 31st, Barry Nelson and Abe Patel mix it up in a back and forth squabble. It was considered a draw after 15 rounds. Barry Nelson would get several opportunities for championship honors. But you see, Abe Patel was mafia driven. There was no way in the world that Barry Nelson would defeat Abe Patel. That's just what it was. April 11th, Coma, California's lightweight Packer McFarlane would mix it up with Jimmy Britt. He would knock out Britt in 6 rounds. When I read that, it was remarkable to me because Jimmy Britt was a pretty decent fighter. April 18th, world heavyweight champion Tommy Burns knocks out another soft touch in Jewish Smith, 5 rounds, in Paris, France. After the end of the bout, Jack Johnson once again will call out Tommy Burns and say, "You're handpicking your opponents. I'm the true champion. Fight me next. Fight me next." That reminds me of George Foreman after his comeback. And he would call out Mike Tyson after all the opponents he would knock out, which was basically Mike Tyson's former sparring partners. And Bigfoot Martin would be the only man to go the distance at that point. He would raise his hand and he would act like he won a championship title of the world in doing so. But Big George Foreman would call out Mike Tyson. Wherever Mike Tyson went, he went. And he never got the title shot. April 23rd, Mike Twin Sullivan defends his claim as welterweight champion against Jimmy Gardner. Now, Twin Sullivan was challenged by Sam Langford. And I told you this once before. Him and his brother Jack. He said he would fight them both at the same time. And they both refused. April 30th, world featherweight champion Little Hebrew Abe Patel knocks out Brooklyn's own Tommy Sullivan in 4 rounds. That contest took place in San Francisco, California. May 1st, world middleweight champion Stanley Ketchel knocks out Jack Twin Sullivan, 20 rounds, Coma, California. It would be for the vacant crown. You see, Stanley Ketchel was champion, but he had to solidify that championship title. And he would when he would defeat Jack Twin Sullivan. Or May 14th, world lightweight champion, Old Master Joe Gans knocks out Rudy on hold in 11 rounds. The contest took place in San Francisco, California, and Joe Gans will remain lightweight champion of the world. At this point, Joe Gans was handcuffed. He was pressured to throw fights, pressured to hold back, carry fighters. He would master his jab and his 1-2 combination punch that he invented. Joe Gans, as you know, was the first black fighter to win a lightweight championship title. He was the first American champion in any sport. He would invent the jab and a 1-2 combination punch. He was the first one to have a car in his neighborhood. I can go on and on with the first with Joe Gans. He was remarkable as a fighter. June 4th, world middleweight champion, Mexican assassin, or Michigan assassin, Stanley Ketchel, protects his middleweight championship crown with a hard-fought defeat over Billy Papke. Now, Papke will wear somewhat of an underwear, G-string, if you will. Stanley Ketchel said, "I'm not fighting this man this way." And they threatened to strip Stanley Ketchel of his title if he did not defend his title against Billy Papke. He said, "Strip the title." They threatened to take his money away, and that's when he said, "No, I can't do that." So he decided to fight him anyway. Billy Papke would walk into the ring with basically a G-string. Incredible. June 13th, world heavyweight champion, 5'7" Tommy Burns knocks out Bill Squire for the second time, this time in 8 rounds. They fought in Paris, France. And once again, Jack Johnson would get into the crowd and get the crowd involved. Fight me next. You see, Tommy Burns was ducking and avoiding Jack Johnson for a long time. And it got to a point where even the fans said, "Look, enough is enough. Just get this man out of here so we can continue." And a lot of them didn't think that Jack Johnson would have a chance against Tommy Burns. Tommy Burns was very athletic. And he knew how to fight. But there was no way in the world Tommy Burns was going to defeat Jack Johnson. I mean, this is ridiculous. July 4th, lightweight battling Nelson would mix it up with Joe Gans. 17 rounds. In Colma, California, became the new lightweight champion of the world. And Joe Gans would receive many death threats before this contest. And he was told to take a dive. Now, Joe Gans got away with it quite often when he was supposed to take dives with Jimmy Britt and many others, and he didn't. But this time it was a serious scenario. An example was shown to Joe Gans. They burned half of his house down before the fight, so he would oblige. Now, July 4th, lightweight Packy McFarlane, Freddie Welch would mix it up. They would go 25 rounds, and it would be called a draw in Los Angeles, California. Both men were black. They were black and blue, and their arms and their neck, their thighs were all black and blue. This fight was a bloodbath. Both men would throw punches and land as often as they would throw. And you can hear the slaps and the impact of those blows 3 to 4 rows back. Swollen eyes, swollen jaws, black and blue all over their body. My God, what a fight that was. July 31st, world colored heavyweight champion Jack Johnson knocks out Ben Taylor in 8 rounds. He would play with Ben Taylor. He would show an example to Tommy Burns that this would happen to you. The contest took place in Plymouth, England. Jack Johnson would be getting much closer to his opportunity. On July 31st, the Michigan assassin, middleweight champion Stanley Ketchel knocks out Hugo Kelly in 3 rounds. Very impressive. He would crack Kelly's ribs during his 2nd round. And Kelly would hold his side, vomiting along the way. August 18th, World Middleweight Champion Stanley Ketchel KOs Joe Thomas in 2 rounds in San Francisco, California. August 24th, World Heavyweight Champion Tommy Burns knocks out Bill Squire once again. This time in the 13th round. The contest took place in Sydney, Australia. And Jack Johnson once again yells to the crowd, "Fight me next." It got to a point where it was obvious that Tommy Burns was avoiding and ducking Jack Johnson, but he just could not get away with it. And the newspaper writers started to write letters that Tommy Burns was avoiding Jack Johnson. He was afraid of Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson was in his head. And all these kinds of things. The World Heavyweight Champion, Jack Johnson, requests a title shot. He was a colored heavyweight champion at that time. But you can basically call him a heavyweight champion at this point because Tommy Burns was not interested in facing Jack Johnson. He tried to stall the fight. He was trying to get out of the fight. But it got to a point where it was so obvious. So I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Look out for another episode of the complete history of boxing. I'm going to show you some scrapbooks in the next video. And we'll keep this conversation going. Thanks for listening. Be well. Peace.